see you. I think I just wanted to start saying that I was really impressed last night. I think this meeting is a success already. It was really impressive to hear all the little introductions and hear how we've come from all over Europe, sitting on our own reading rows or the web page or Tessa's web page, and everybody took the effort to come here. So I thought that was very inspiring. I don't know what I had expected, but I have expected that. And already sitting in the report together with last night, I thought that was very nice. Yeah. But we have lots of things to do this weekend, and we'll start out this morning with Art that will give a talk for the next hour and a half, and probably give an opportunity for questions as well. I had prepared this introduction of half an hour, but as Art introduced himself last night, I think I'm not going to do that. But definitely Art is the master of confrontation. I hope we'll have an opportunity for that during the weekend. I don't know. He's a master at looking at thoughts. He'll probably tell a little about that. And I think it's a privilege to have Art around. He devoted his life to passing on what he learned on the spiritual path. And he did all of that also before his final experience. So I'm really opposed to hear what you have to say. And don't only listen to his words. He transmits in different ways. So don't always listen to what he says. Welcome, Art.
Thanks, Jette. We're going to put the glasses. This idea of standing up and lecturing you or sermonizing you isn't very appealing to me, to be honest. I'd rather just interact with you. But it's hard to find a common ground of language even, to see if we're talking, using words in the same way. So I think there is some value in trying to do this. But what I have in mind is talking for maybe half an hour, and then have some time for questions and answers, and then I've got a little exercise experiment I'd like to try with you. Maybe we'll get the people who are sitting in the back row to get in the front for the experiment. I'm always curious to see who's sitting in the back row. So, looking forward. I've got some notes about the topic. I've tried to say a few things that relate to the topic the way I think of the topic anyway. And before I get started, I've got a couple suggestions. One is take Jette's advice. Don't pay too much attention to what I say. In fact, you'd be better off doubting what I say than agreeing with it. And the reason for that is because the spiritual path, I sort of gave you my view on that last night too. The spiritual path is one of transcending our beliefs. Our beliefs aren't necessarily wrong, but they're not the whole truth. And what you're looking for, I believe, what everyone is looking for, is the whole truth. And so to get there, if your mind is at all like mine, and I suspect all the minds operate pretty much the same way, what the mind is always doing is looking for data that supports our current beliefs. And so you could say the mind is programmed, it's structured to try to get more certainty, get more security, get more stability, because there's a feeling the mind has based on its structure being split into subject and object. There's an inherent feeling that goes along with that of instability, of vulnerability. We feel we're something separate that's apart. We're apart from, separate something, and being a separate something is a vulnerable position to be in. So the mind is, to me, it makes a tremendous amount of sense, but the mind is structured to do what it's doing. And in a way, the idea of knowing the truth is transcending the mind. In fact, from within the mind, you can't. as many people who know me know, I tried to approach the truth by understanding, so I was mainly a thinker, as opposed to a feeler. Although I can see that underneath it all, we're all doing the same thing, which is like feeling our way in the dark. But some of us are more consciously feeling our way, some are more consciously thinking our way. So I was trying to understand the truth. In other words, I was trying to get my mind around the truth, to swallow it, you could say. And after years and years and years and years of doing that, finally dawned on me one morning, just a quiet little realization, this isn't going to work, it's not going to take me all the way. But I didn't know what other tool to use. And so I think people who are primarily trying to feel their way, they also, so you could say that there's a trap for the intellectual person trying to get to the truth. And there's also a trap for the intuitive person trying to get to the truth. And we're both sort of stuck in that rut. Maybe every once in a while somebody has a fairly even balance, and they'd be fortunate if they did, because somehow the whole process of transcending the relative and becoming what we are, consciously knowing what we are, is getting above. So this dimension we find ourselves in is based on opposites. There's no up without down. And the only way to get any kind of a view that is above a land of back and forth and up and down, whatever, is to get to the point of the triangle where now you realize you're able to view that opposition. And Richard Rose, for the folks who've done some reading, found on the websites or the books of Richard Rose, one of the primary things he tried to do after his realization was to come up with some kind of a way to talk about like a generic path that people who have found the truth may look back and see, there's some commonalities. Everybody's path is different, and I think Tess mentioned this last night. So our personalities are unique. They develop based on maybe genetics and our life experience. I think our personalities are primarily defensive mechanisms that we start off by the time at least by the time we become self-conscious at age 4 or 5 or whatever that is, where every little hit then, the mind reacts, I've got to get myself in a position so I won't get that same hit again. And I think that's basically how you describe how our personalities develop, why we react the way we do. And so, doubt what people say. If you hear something and it sounds good and you agree with it, that to me is a symptom the mind is saying, aha, here's something that supports my current beliefs. And let's see, there was something else I was going to mention also. I probably have a note here, but I hate to look at it. My memory has become something, a piece of paper I stick in my pocket now. Oh yeah, the other thing is this moment. So when you get right down to it, I would argue that there's only one moment in life. And of course, the way the mind works in this dimension, moments click off, don't they? But other than this moment right now, everything else is basically, it's either something stored in the database, what we call memory, or it's some imagination about what's going to happen the next moment. But all we can really count on is this moment, and let's make the best use of it we can. So the theme for the weekend, essential transformation. My reaction to that was there's good news and bad news about that. So the good news is that essentially what we are at the core of our beings, there's no problem there. So essentially everything's fine just the way it is. You'd have to take somebody else's word for that, right? So it's baloney from the standpoint of our existence. In existence, there are lots and lots of problems. So if somebody says, oh yeah, there's no problem, we're already what we're looking for, well, that may be true, but if the conscious mind doesn't have that knowledge, then to me, dreamless sleep is the answer. Every night we go back to our source, but we wake up in the morning and what we believe ourselves to be, we don't know that, right? So we know we're refreshed, and even that's an indication. And I think many people who meditate gravitate toward meditation techniques that give them refreshment. They may find some form of samadhi when they come out of it, they'd feel wonderful. So who wouldn't like that? But it's a sweet sticking point lots of times. And I think the people who are fortunate enough to tumble into cosmic consciousness or the unitive experience, like they talk about it in Catholic contemplative literature, but that's also a very sweet point where you could stay with. And it would be a trap from that standpoint. So, and probably every little satori we get, or every little insight, we have a tendency to think this may be it, you know. So at least the rest periods are good, but we want to keep our fingers crossed that they don't go on too long. And the bad news, the good news is there's really no problem. The bad news is, but that doesn't mean there's nothing to be done. And so that reminds me, I have to watch the clock because I'll ramble for a long time once I get started on these stories. But the first little satori experience I ever had after I met Richard Rose, I was halfway to, old man at the time anyway. I was 33 years old, and almost everybody, Bob and everybody else, well, Bob wasn't there yet, but almost everybody who was there or came on later was at least 10 years younger than me, so I was like the old guy to start with. And but some were very polite, you know how people are, how youngsters are to old folks sometimes. And so I'd done a week-long retreat with Richard Rose within a year when I met him. It was in the wintertime. And when I got back, and this was at the farm, and when I got back to work, I don't think it was the first day after that, but toward the end of that week when I was back to work, one afternoon about 4:45, or maybe it's a little earlier than that, 4:30, something like that, I felt something happening to me that had never happened before. And I figured I've got to hold this off until people leave, and I'm by myself. So eventually everybody left. None of the people in my office were hard workers, I guess. So everybody left about 5 o'clock, the closing time. And I just closed my door, turned the light off in the office. Before that time, I had taken a 3-ring binder out of my desk drawer. I swiveled my chair around away from the door, and I put it on my knee like I was working on something, so I wouldn't be interrupted. And so at 5 o'clock, then, when I felt, okay, I can let go now, I felt myself going up. And I knew I was still consciously sitting in the chair, but anyway, this ended up, there were 2 of these things, and each time I got a snapshot, like a picture of something new I hadn't seen before. And one of them was, everything is. And so when my mind saw this new view, it immediately scrambled to get an understanding, so I could go back to sleep, basically, so the mind could go back to sleep. But I made notes on these 2 little satori experiences that happened that time, and the next time I saw Richard Rose, I told him about him, proud. look at me, Mr. Rose. And so when I told him about this one, everything is, his immediate reaction was, yes, but that doesn't mean there's nothing to be done. And I thought, how could he possibly think I would be so naive, so ignorant to come to that conclusion? And a year or so later, when I was, every year when I did a solitary retreat, I'd take my journal from the previous year and go back through it, and I'd be shivering the whole time. How could I have been so, unsophisticated last month and stuff like that? But in my journal, when I got to the point where I made the notes about that, what had happened in the office that day, word for word, I put down there, therefore nothing needs to be done. So our friend Sean Nevins, who some of you probably had some exposure to, either through his works or know him, at one time at a TAP meeting, he said to the folks, anybody who doesn't keep, any seeker who doesn't keep a journal is a fool. And I knew exactly what I was talking about, because things change so much from the story that we tell ourselves in our mind of what happened last week or a year ago, So the bad news, something needs to be done. And to me, that's in this dimension, the mind-heart dimension. So nothing needs to be done at the core of our being. In fact, so transformation would be impossible there. There isn't any form, so that non-form isn't going to change. Couldn't change if it wanted to. But the something to be done is in this dimension here. And so the way I use the term mind, I don't have one particular definition for it. I would have 10 years ago, but after being around Richard Rose, it finally wore off. I think that this wordsmith kind of stuff of pinning down the exact definition for a word that, it doesn't mean anything. But the way I would use mind, or at least the way I'm using it now, is this dimension, experience, the cosmos, life and death. That this is mind. It's a dimension. And in this dimension, everything is defined by its opposite. Everything is relative to something else. And an example of that is Einstein did these very simple thought experiments to try to get an understanding, or maybe to, I don't know if he used it so much in his own thinking, or maybe to communicate the idea of relativity. And so one of them that stuck with, the only one that stuck with me, is he said, suppose there are two people in space. I think he had them sitting in chairs, but I don't recall for sure. But two people in space coming toward each other. How fast is this person going? How fast is this person going? And the only thing that is conceivable, so space, there's nothing except these two guys, right? And the only thing that's conceivable is you can measure how fast A is coming toward B, which is the same as how fast B is coming toward A. There's no absolute point of reference. So if there were an absolute point of reference, like when we were coming over the plane, they were using ground speed. That was interesting. They didn't say how fast the plane is flying, but they said this is how fast the ground is moving under us. And so for these two guys in space, there was no absolute point. A could have been going at 10 miles an hour and B at 15 miles an hour. There's no way to gauge that unless you have some other point of reference. And unknowingly, that's what we're all looking for. So the solution to feeling vulnerable, to feeling insecure, to feeling unloved. You know, how many people that have said what I'm looking for is unconditional love? And I could very well have defined my goal is unconditional love. Those weren't the words that my mind chose, but I can see that that's exactly the same goal. So it doesn't make any difference if somebody says what I'm looking for is security, or what I'm looking for is love, or what I'm looking for is meaning. Underneath it all, if we're greedy enough and can't settle until we get something that really satisfies the mind, it's the same thing. It's that absolute point of reference. And of course, so it would be like eternality. If you walked into a room of eternality and you weren't eternal, it wouldn't do you any good. So finding an absolute point of reference, the only way that can satisfy the mind is if what we are is absolute. It turns out to be that's the case. So heart, the term heart, the way I use that is, you know, generally we talk about it in terms of it's a feeling association, right? So a person with a big heart or a person who's wholehearted, we're talking about feeling, which is sort of also associated with the side of the, is that the right brain? Yeah. The right brain. Mm-hmm. And if you're familiar with Jill Bolte Taylor, have you heard about her? She was a neuroscientist at Harvard who had a hemorrhage of her left hemisphere. And she didn't freak out, and she knew enough about the way the brain worked from her research that she could tell which parts of the brain were being flooded by blood, and when the visual cortex was flooded by blood and shut down, she lost the ability to detect edges. And so all of a sudden, her self-definition's gone. So our self-definition, we've got self and we've got other, right? And self is, generally we say, well, the edge of self is the body, the skin, you know, the body's outline. She couldn't see that anymore. Now, whether she could feel it, she didn't talk about that. It'd be interesting to ask her about that. But so seeing's our primary input anyway for most of seeing people. Douglas Harding surprisingly found out that even his experiments, you know, all these experiments that are based on looking at what you're looking out from, stuff like that, blind people told him they worked just as well for them. It shocked him. So heart, what was I talking about? Heart, yeah. So Jill Bolte Taylor, when that happened, she had what I would say is the cosmic consciousness experience. She became one with everything. She couldn't distinguish self from other. So she became one with everything. And she thought she had dialed nirvana. And she worked for 8 years to get her capabilities back, and then after that period of time, she started writing about her experience. She called it, the book is My Stroke of Insight. It's a wonderful book. And she did a talk on TED.com, which you know, maybe 45 minutes gives a lot of the information. It's a wonderful talk. But she thinks she's dialed nirvana, and now she's going around telling people, I'd like to be able to help you get here, because it's such a relief when the other thing that was lost besides the edge detection was the story that's going on all the time about, my name is Jill Bolte Taylor, I'm a neuroscientist, you know, I'm 5 feet 8 inches tall, whatever it is, you know, I drive this car, I live in this apartment. And when that stopped, she realized, oh my God, this is like heaven without that story going on all the time. So to me, that's something that we might say heart, but I think heart is actually a higher level of functioning within the mind. And I equate it with intuition. So there's an intuition, like there's feeling at a lower level of the mind. If you want to go lower process in the mind, lower level process, there's feeling, and there's feeling at a higher level. So Franklin Merrill Wolff, who was a mathematician, and I think I had a mentality more like his, you know, was primarily intellectual. What was I going to say about that as far as heart? Something. What was that train of thought? Anyway, it'll come back. But yeah, he's the first one I ever heard say that there's an intellectual intuition as well. I don't think intuition is primarily on the right side of the mind, but it works both in a feeling sense and a scientific or an intellectual sense. Intuition is an opening, so the heart part of the mind opens. And when that happens, you get a different picture. And so I think that's when you hear people say all you need to do is surrender, I think they're basically referring to that operation. Something happens, you know, I don't think we know how to do it. You can't surrender, obviously. That's just, you know, it'd be like deciding not to decide. So something happens, this part of the mind opens, the heart, what I call the heart, or the intuition opens. And when that happens, the lower part of the feeling side of the mind, the feeling operation of the mind, the fears and desires start yammering. And 9 times out of 10, so opening of the heart, an example of that's falling in love. And the first time you fall in love, there's probably no opposition. But then if you get hurt and whatever, the next time you fall in love, pretty soon the fear voices and the other desires, oh, I don't want to be tied down. I'm afraid if this happens, I'm going to get rejected again. That closes the heart. That shuts the intuition, you could say. So to me, that's, I would use heart in that sense. It's a higher function of the mind, maybe associated with feeling, but not necessarily the emotional, just the emotional kind of feeling. And so to me, that's where the work needs to be done. In the mind, and particularly in the heart part, the intuitive part of the mind. You can see a lot of puzzled faces now. So what's to be done? Well, whenever I think about giving a talk, I find myself, so if I'm thinking about it for 3 days, every day I step back further and think, oh no, I need to go back further into this. It's not even thinking that, it's just that it occurs to me, no, I've got to start farther back. And it comes to me that what we need to do every day is start at the beginning. In the beginning of the spiritual search, you might think this is overly negative, but I think I think all search, but the spiritual search, since we're talking about that, is based on dissatisfaction. So I don't think we'd get out of bed in the morning if there wasn't dissatisfaction. There's tension of some kind. Either it's not always negative, so it may be, I'm so excited I can't wait to get up and kill somebody, you know. But lots of times it's just, I've got to go to the bathroom, right? Or I'm hungry, I've got to get up, or I've got to get up and go to work. So there's tension, and that's the basis of all action. And the basis of the spiritual action is no different. There's tension, there's insecurity, there's a desire for security, there's a feeling of there's something missing. And to me, it's here. I think a lot of people feel it here. It took a long time for me to know that feelings are something you do, not something you handle. You just feel feelings, you know. You don't handle feelings. But I think the very best starting point for anybody, but in particular now for a spiritual search, is the first thing in the morning, feel that deep want. Something's missing, something's lacking. Because I think that's, when you do that, it triggers the mind. The mind is a problem-solving computer as far as I'm concerned. And most of the time there's some immediate little thing that needs to get solved. So I'm hungry, I've got to find my way to the classroom or whatever it is. So the mind works on solving that problem. But whenever there's free time, we try to find distraction. Why is that? So I always had to make sure my mind had something to keep busy if there was going to be some free time. And I'd always have a backup plan. Well, if that doesn't work, if I can't find my book, I'll have something, you know. I was scared to death that things would just stop. I didn't know that. I can see that in retrospect. And the reason for that is whenever we get the Douglas Harding look, so if somebody says, are you awake? It actually, the mind is looking back in this direction to see if I'm here.
Mm-hmm.
So this feeling of I amness, of self-consciousness, not the self-consciousness meaning I want to hide in the corner, but just being conscious that we're conscious. When the mind looks back in that direction, what does it see? It doesn't see anything, right? And that's scary. And to me, the intuition, that part of the mind gets things in a way we aren't quite aware of how it does it. It has the intuition, if I keep looking back in that direction, I'm going to get pulled into it. And I think that's the void that people talk about, like in Buddhism.